Have you ever met a math guru who shreds the keytar and just so happens to be in a rock band that opened for Bon Jovi?
Vanessa Vakharia, aka the Math Guru, joins us today on the show to talk about why stereotypes are the biggest obstacle when it comes to teaching math, why failing grade 11 math twice was the best thing that ever happened to her, and why we need to recognize students have math trauma that need math therapy. Hey, and one more thing. What the show Ted Lasso can teach us about math education.
Let's hit it. Welcome to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr. We are from MakeMathMoments.com, and together
with you, the community of math moment makers worldwide who want to build and deliver problem-based math lessons that spark curiosity,
fuel sense-making,
and ignite your teacher moves. All right, my friends, we are going to be jumping on here in just a moment with a fellow Canadian, a fellow Ontarian,
Ontarian, you got it,
who is going to be chatting with us today about mindsets in math class, math therapy, and so much more. John, tell me one quick little takeaway here from this conversation to set us up for our convo here with Vanessa.
Yeah, I mentioned this in the conversation you're about to hear, and it's just such an important idea that I probably never thought about when I was a beginning teacher, is about how much emotional attachment or emotional response students have to just thinking about going to math class or in math class, or thinking about taking that test or taking that, doing that assignment. And, sometimes we teachers just go in and go, okay, we're going to do this. And we don't think that there is such an emotional, reaction or response to what we do in our class. And I think knowing that can help us, do better and realize and make choices to help our students deal with some of their stress and anxiety that they have coming in the door. So I think we talk about some tips on how to help students do manage those things. So I think an important episode for us to hear today.
I love it. And, it also kind of brings us right back to this conversation we have often around getting to know who our learners are, right? As people who are more likely to be maybe triggered by something in math class, or to be maybe overthinking or getting anxious, or already just has that anxiety there. It's almost like math is just that trigger for them. And what can we do about it as math educators? So friends, I think you're going to enjoy this conversation with Vanessa. So without further ado, here we go. Hey there, Vanessa. Thanks for joining us here. It's early morning for all of us here on the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. But Vanessa, things are looking great for you. And for those watching on YouTube, for Keanu Reeves, who's in the background, good friend of yours, I'm sure. It looks like you're wide awake. How are things going in your world?
Things are great. I am not wide awake, just for listeners to know. It's funny because before we started the interview, Kyle and John were like, oh, you sleep in. And if by sleep in, you mean wake up at a respectable time, like 8 o'clock, I do.
See, the day's already past most, there's hours that have passed that were productive time. Vanessa, we want to welcome you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. We've chatted, we've dug a little deeper ourselves, but our listeners haven't yet. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're coming from. And also give us a little backstory on how you got into math education.
Okay, well, in brief, I am coming from Toronto, Ontario.
Go Toronto.
Yeah. What?
I said, go Toronto.
Go Toronto. Okay, great. I, unlike most people, do not think that Toronto is the center of the universe. I just happen to be here. This is where my business, The Math Guru, is. But before we get there, I will start by saying that the reason I got into math education is I, a lowly teenager who just wanted to be a rock star and marry Keanu Reeves. Failed grade 11 math, not once, but twice. And the whole time I was failing, I was told, Vanessa, you're just not a math person. Like, you're more of the creative type. You're more of the artsy type. And I was like, oh my God, that's it. People like me aren't good at math. And I just grew up with that belief until after failing grade 11 math for the second time and then barely passing in summer school with a 57, I had this amazing grade 12 teacher who completely changed my life. And I walked into her classroom and I said, listen, you're going to have a really tough time. I'm not a math person. She looked at me and said, sorry? And I was like, oh, I'm not a math person. And she looked me in the eye and said the words that would change my life forever. And she just said, that's not a thing. And I ended up with a 98 in grade 12 math, and the rest is history. We could go on. But the point is now I founded a tutoring company called The Math Guru, where my whole goal is to change stereotypes around what it means to be a math person. I have a master's in math education where I studied media representations of mathematicians and why so many people believe they're not quote unquote math people because of Hollywood. Not Keanu though, not Keanu.
He would never.
Matrix. He's fine.
No.
And I'm in a rock band called Goodnight Sunrise. So it's all kind of connected because I am both a rock star and a mathematician. And all of those people who told me I couldn't be both are, well, they're just wrong, I guess.
I love it. I love it. And your story is, I think, connects with so many people. Actually, one of our curriculum writers, Yvette Lehman, has a very similar story, like, and maybe not the exact, grade 11 was the stumbling block. I think in her mind, she believes she is. And again, it's like, we're all rock stars as well. But the reality is that there's so many people out there who struggle along the way at some point and then just sort of get written off as though, it's not even a possibility when the opposite is true. So I'm super wondering here, on the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast, we ask everyone this, and you've already shared one moment for us, but I don't know if that is the moment. I'm going to say that is a massive defining moment. I'm wondering, I'd love it if you could dig back before that grade 11 experience and try to sort of like, what other moment pops out for you that was a defining moment in your math journey? So we always ask that math moment. You shared a huge one, obviously, right there. I'm wondering though, like before grade 11, where was your mind at? Like, were you like, oh, I'm, everything's fine, and there were no stumbling blocks, or were you already feeling that way? And that teacher maybe in grade 11 sort of, stamped it for you as like, oh yeah, for sure, I'm not a math person. Or, take us back a little bit before then. How were you thinking and feeling about math?
Well, I would say I am like totally like a product of celebrity culture. Like I always not to date myself, as they say, but like I would read like Bop magazine and like all those magazines with the teen heartthrobs. Like I was obsessed with celebrities. Like I was in the Full House fan club. I went to Tim Ringer and I was stalking celebrities. So like, I think especially for like a young teenage girl who's super impressionable, I was so influenced by media representation. So I think like, I'm very, very focused and very obsessed with identity, which is why I think I work so well with teenagers. Like we are constantly in flux of trying to form our identities. And as a young girl, I was looking to celebrities and to characters in movies to do that. That was kind of my comfort zone. So I would say long before grade 11, I'd already decided like what, and I'm using air quotes for those of you who can't see, like what type of person I was. And I definitely in no way was interested in math. Like there was no one I'd ever seen in any media representation who did math and then was like me, right? Like that looked like me, that acted like me, that dressed like me, that had the same interests as me. Like that wasn't really an option. So I would say long before I actually started doing poorly in math, I already was completely disinterested and had written myself off because I was like, oh, like that's not a path that somebody like me would ever take. So in a way, it has nothing to do with the math, but in a way, it has everything to do with math because math doesn't exist in a silo, right? And our interest in math doesn't exist in a silo. It's like something we either absorb or don't as part of our identity. So, when I was younger, like this isn't even interesting because when I was younger, this didn't occur to me, like I was just going along in elementary school doing math. I wasn't even really allowed to watch TV. So I would say it was almost like once I became a teenager, once I had access to television and magazines and like, again, celebrity culture and much music, that's when things started to change.
Gotcha. Yeah, I find that such an interesting thing when we reflect back on that time, and we didn't have these thoughts about who we, where we were and what these outside influences have as an effect on us until later. Yeah. And especially in the math, in our math history, it's not until I reflected back where I'm like, oh, that had a big impact on how I perceive mathematics. And it's different now, but it had an impact then, but I didn't realize it then. Vanessa, I'm wondering if, you've shared two moments or some big moments here about your influences towards how you view math. I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit of snapshot of how that translated into your role in education now and how you use that mindset that you've talked about in your day-to-day workings with students.
So I think, I don't know any kid that grows up being like, I'm going to own a math tutoring company. That was like definitely never my intention. I would say once I had that breakthrough moment in grade 12, like I always say this when I'm talking to teachers or parents of students about math. It's not that it, turned me into someone who was like, oh my God, I can do math. I'm going to go work for NASA. It actually turned me into a person who was like, oh my God, I can do anything I want. Like I have been made to believe I can't do this one thing on the planet, that I'm like genetically deficient, and that's been proven wrong. So what else can I do? Like that was the moment when I was like, maybe I will start a rock band, it really changed everything. But one of the things it did is it made me want to change that for other people. I was like, oh my God, I need to start showing everyone that they can do math. So like immediately I was tutoring everyone in my grade 12 math class, we were going to coffee time after school and like smoking cigarettes. Okay, this was a long time ago, guys, okay, when you were allowed to do that. And we were like we were doing math, and I was getting everyone so pumped up, and everyone was kind of like, oh my God. And it just led to like, I was kind of like, I think I need to do this. I did end up going to teachers college. I did try working in a high school classroom. Not for me. I am not a good disciplinarian. I'll tell you that right now. But from that, I started tutoring. And as I was tutoring one-on-one, I realized that one-on-one, I could have these conversations with students. I could make them math problems that like revolved around their favorite celebrities and their favorite TV shows. I could get them really interested. I could talk to them about my story. And honestly, it was like one thing led to another. And the next thing I know, I'm here today with 50 tutors and a tutoring studio. And the way, I guess it's almost like, it's a funny question because I'm like, well, it creeps into every single part of my life. Like my tutoring studio has pink velvet couches, and we serve tea lattes, and I light incense, and I'm like reading kids tarot cards before their tutoring sessions and talking to them about like their boy problems. And like, then that incorporates into their confidence and how they feel about math. Like it all ties together so seamlessly. Like I hire tutors who are actors, lawyers, magicians, like athletes, everything to show kids. Like as soon as you walk in the door of the tutoring studio, you're like, oh my God, whoever you are, you feel like you belong there. It's not like you have to take off your hat of your identity to then fit into the math culture, which I think is what actually happens a lot in classrooms and in society as large. You're expected to speak in a certain language and look a certain way and to stop chewing gum and to like, even to not swear. Like, I know that sounds silly, right? But it's like, I allow kids and teenagers to bring their full selves to math because that's what I needed. And it just makes such a difference. So I think, hopefully that answers the question, but yeah. I think that's kind of it.
Yeah, I love it. And, you kind of touched on a couple things already, and I want to dig a little deeper here because I know that you've talked a lot about math therapy, and you've touched on it, right? In how a lot of students, a lot of adults who are adults now still believe or have like a phobia or have this sort of tainted relationship with mathematics, right? Or this negative relationship with mathematics. I'm wondering, and I know that you believe, and you had already said you have these opportunities to have one-on-one conversations with students, kind of dig into things and kind of almost take them through this math therapy session. I'm curious, if you're working with a student who has this mindset, they come forward and maybe like you see right away, you're like, oh my gosh, it's grade 11 me, right? Like your former self feeling negatively about math, what does that look and sound like when you have that conversation? I know with my own kids sometimes, when they're struggling with something, my son's 8, my daughter's 10. We try to have these conversations, about how, you have to want to do well and, with something, and you have to believe the fact that if you put that time in, that, you're going to get better. What does that look like and sound like from a math context when you're having those conversations?
That's such a good question. And I mean, I will start by saying, so Math Therapy is a podcast, actually, I started 4 years ago because I do a lot of media work with math. So like I'm often at TV stations and, radio stations. And the stereotype holds that most journalists, as soon as you say the word math, like visibly recoil, and then we'll publicly say on air, like on global news or whatever, they'll say, "Oh, math, I can barely count to 10." Like they're just out there reinforcing that stereotype. But
totally,
aside from being upset by that, I was like, oh my God, these adults need math therapy. Like they are literally having physical trauma responses to the word math. So started this podcast, and as I was, working with adults on their math trauma, I was simultaneously working on kids with it because that's what I'm used to doing. And there are so many situations like, now I've created a math therapy program for teachers to actually use in the classroom. You can literally do it in a group setting, right? Because a lot of it is storytelling, a lot of it is activity-based, but one-on-one with a student, like I'm gonna just think of an example right now. I have 2 examples, okay? So I have this one high school student who's amazing. She has like serious anxiety around math. We all know that math anxiety is like a huge thing right now. I think like, first of all, as adults, it's hard to realize this, but especially as young people, it's hard to realize that your anxiety is actually related to something else. So for her, I said to her one-on-one, I was like, when you go into these math tests and you're freaking out and you're blanking, what is it you're scared of? And you start there and they'll say something, oh, I'm scared of failing the math test. What would happen if you failed the math test? Well, I'd get a bad mark. What would happen if you got a bad mark? Well, maybe I'd fail math. And what would happen if you failed math? Well, I wouldn't get into university. What would happen if you didn't get into university? I would never get a job. And at a certain point you say, do you really think that's going to happen? Do you really think you're not going to get a job and you're going to have, whatever? And they'll kind of be like, well, no, and then you can kind of backtrack a bit and say, what happens if you fail that math test? Realistically, what would happen? Would it ruin your whole mark for the entire year? And then you start peeling it back and the answer is no. And then you can actually start focusing on the positives that might come from that. What if you went in there and you failed that math test? Is there something good that could come out of it? Well, yeah, I might learn that I need to study a different way. So I think part of it is just peeling back the roots of the anxiety. And it's really cognitive behavioral therapy, which like I learned from my own therapist, but using it in a math context of what is it that you're really scared of? And then you can also start developing strategies. So like, if you're really scared that you're going to fail your test and you're going to be a failure in life and you're never going to get into university, if that's your fear, before you go into your math test, let's write down that is not going to happen. And let's write down that the outcome of this test doesn't matter that much. Let's relay that. Like, let's just promise you're going to do your best, and whatever you learn from the mark you get or from the outcome of that test will be sufficient. Another thing I try to do is set different goals. So instead, if you're a really math anxious student, instead of your goal being, I have to get 90 on the test, I want your goal to be that you're not going to cry during this math test. Like, let's try to not cry. Like that's all you have to do this test. Like, I don't care what mark you get. And like, so that kind of stuff really helps shift focus. And I think for me, it's really easy for me to tap into what a student's feeling and why they're particularly anxious or what their math trauma might be, because it's so much of that has happened to me. But I think also the big part of it comes from naming it. We don't name it with students. We don't say, because a lot of, even on the podcast, people will say, I don't think I had a traumatic incident. And you'll peel it back and they'll say something like, well, my mom always told me like it was genetic that I wasn't good at math. And I'll be like, bam, there it is. Yeah. That's traumatic. Or like if you grow up in a society where no one who looks like you is good at math, that is actually traumatic. So like, it's something my therapist taught me that's called sneaky trauma. It doesn't seem traumatic at the time, but when you look back, it has induced a trauma response. So all of those things, like just to back up, because I've been rambling, for teachers or educators listening, naming the trauma making it okay for, really saying to your kid, don't worry, like, I got you. Like, you've had something crappy happen to you. You had a teacher yell at you once. You had a kid laugh at you once when you got the wrong answer. That sucks. That sucks. And I totally get it. And that's partially why you feel the way you do. Let's talk about it and work on it. Number 2, setting different goals that aren't as anxiety inducing. And number 3, really peeling back with a kid one-on-one to figure out what it is they're afraid of. So you can tackle what they're afraid of instead of like the little Band-Aid on top, which is the math.
Yeah, those are some really great tips on thinking about this emotional impact that the math class actually invokes when people, and I think that's as teachers, we don't think about that enough. And I'm a high school teacher, and I know that I definitely used to never think about how math class impacts students' emotions when they walk in the door. And last fall we had Tom Schimmer on in our virtual math summit, which I think you are joining us for this next year, next year's math summit. And he talked about in his assessment seminar all about like that we have to recognize that students are emotionally impacted just by talking about mathematics, and it comes in many different ways, and we have to take that into account because we are assessing our students for growth. And so we can't disregard that kids are going to have an emotional response to being assessed or taking that test, or even just walking in the door. So I'm glad you brought that up and provided a few tips for us teachers to think about that moving forward. Vanessa, why do you think, I know that you've chatted about this before, but why do you think that stereotypes are our greatest obstacle? Because I think teachers might not immediately think that. They might think like, getting kids to attend class or homework, or, think, how do I get procedural fluent? Like there's a ton of things that teachers put in their minds as going, this is my biggest pebble right now in my shoe. And you're saying your biggest pebble for all of us should be, how do we address stereotypes in math class? Like, why do you think that's the greatest obstacle we have right now?
Well, okay. So it's so funny because Kyle, you said earlier that when you talk to your kids, you're trying to talk to them about how you have to want to do well at something, right? Like, and when I think about one of my biggest math moments, in that grade 12 math teacher who told me there's no such thing as a math person. It's not like, oh, bam, I became a genius, but it changed my attitude, right? Like I was kind of like, oh, if there's no such thing as a math person, that means that when I'm faced with an obstacle, I have what it takes to overcome it, right? Like it changed my mindset. So, when we say stereotypes, we're really talking about mindset being the biggest obstacle. And one of the there are stereotypes about what it means to be good at math and what that looks like and what you have to be like and what skills you have to possess. So that's really harmful because, for example, if you're not like Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting and you can't do crazy calculations in your head, you might think, you know what? I suck at mental math. I'll never be good at math. But mental math is one tiny component of being good at math. There are many ways to be good at math. So that's one stereotype we have to break. But in terms of mindset, almost a more harmful stereotype is that people who are good at math or who want to do math or who excel at math don't have a bright future ahead. They're losers. They, can't be in a romantic relationship. They can only have super boring jobs. All the math you're learning is completely pointless unless you want to be like this person. And it's funny because in a way, I think as teachers, we think we've got to make this math really meaningful to kids. We have to make it relevant so they want to do it. I actually think what it is we have to make the idea of being good at math attractive to kids. So whenever someone says to me, why do I need this math? What I say is, when I learned that I could do math and when I persevered past those obstacles, that's when I started a rock band. Like, it's not like, oh, that's when I became a math teacher and that's when I started getting straight A's. It's when you can push through something that you think you're not good at, or that it takes you extra hard work to do. You're building a skill that is valuable way beyond the math classroom. You're proving that your brain can think differently. It can think under pressure. You can come up with creative ways to solve problems. Those are all skills that you're going to need in whatever pursuit you want to follow, is that the world is going to throw you all sorts of curveballs. And if you can think on your feet, and if you can solve obstacles or solve problems creatively, if you can keep going, even when the going gets tough, those are the main skills you need to succeed. And like math class teaches that above all else. So I think that stereotype is twofold. It's not just like what it means to be a quote unquote math person, but it's what can being good at math and pursuing math and building a better relationship with math, what can that bring you in life?
I love it. I love it. That's a great, like a great answer, because I feel we are also, have a very similar mindset in terms of even the math curriculum that we write and what we bring to the math classroom. There used to be, for a really long time, both John and I were on this journey. I know a lot of educators, other math moment makers out there are on this journey where we're trying to make math cool, and we're like working so hard to make it, relate to every single student. And what we've sort of realized over time is it's like, no, like we want to craft opportunities to challenge students, because like we're humans, like humans enjoy challenge if it's an appropriate amount of challenge, right? Like if we're giving them an impossible, feat given where they are now, like, hey, if I want my son to try to, jump this far and he's only 8 years old and it's impossible for that to happen, that's not an acceptable or a useful challenge. But in math class, there's so many things we can do, even if the concept itself isn't something that I'm going to pull out of my pocket, every day in my life, like that real world, that relevant, that, useful in, once I'm out in the real world. We've sort of kind of put that aside. And I loved how you mentioned that. It's about figuring out how to get out of a pickle, how do you get out of a pinch? You're in this scenario. It's like we're constantly trying to craft these scenarios for students where it's like, okay, let's like pique your curiosity. Like, let's get that curiosity going. And let's get you thinking about this scenario, even though this scenario may not be something that will ever happen again. But it's like that thinking that you're doing is so important. And I think it also comes back to something I think most educators, whether they are, in the back to basics camp, or if they're in the inquiry camps or somewhere in between, we all want students to be comfortable, like fluent and flexible with numbers, so that they can like sort of like, visualize the numbers they're working with. So I love that so much. And that stereotype thing, as you've mentioned, I think is so key, because if it's not cool to think, right. And that's where I think it is, right. Those news anchors. Yeah. Like when you had said, like, how many news anchors are, they either like, make fun of themselves on camera for not being good at math, or it just blows my mind.
He was like, I need to use my feet to count to 20, and proceeded to pull his shoe out of his sock on the national news. But I've got to say, to your point, one thing I always ask elementary kids when they're like, I can't do math, I say, okay, guys, I'm in a rock band. There were 5 of us. And we always argue about who gets to pick the first song we play. What can we do? And they all have all these crazy ideas. You could all put your name in a hat. You could all rotate. So every 5th show you're back. Like they have, and I'm like, you're doing math. You're doing math in 5 right now. And you're thinking of all these creative solutions. They're not in a rock band. This isn't relevant to their lives, but they all want to solve my problem for me because I'm fighting with all my bandmates and they don't want the band to break up, So like, exactly like you said, it's like that. Yeah.
You do tell them though, right? The real right way to pick is the person who plays the keytar always picks.
No, and then I'm like, you don't know who Bon Jovi is? Get out of here. Yeah. Get out of here. And math education doesn't have a crisis. Music education.
Yeah. That's hilarious. And that actually goes back to a big piece that Kyle and I chat about here on the podcast too, is about storytelling and context matter so much to, bring students into, the lessons that we teach them every day. And in talking about storytelling, I know that you're a big fan of the show Ted Lasso. As I am as well. I think one of the best shows that has been on TV in a long time. Hey, what have you learned, I think, about math education? Because when we talk about Ted Lasso, it is not a math education show. And teachers, I'm sure, who have seen the show or are listening right now are going, yeah, like that's a soccer show or a coaching show or a life show. It's, hey, what have you learned about how Ted Lasso can help us teachers in the classroom?
Okay, well, if you know Ted Lasso, you know that his motto, his mantra, his, be all end all is just the word believe. Ted Lasso is all about mindset. He is coaching a team of underdogs, and above all else, he's like, at the end of the day, you have to believe that it's possible to win the game. And I always say this to teachers, and also, like, I don't want to make anyone feel bad. I think it's hard, especially when you have those kids that are really struggling. It's hard to believe that they can improve. But I always say kids can feel that. We can feel that when someone believes in us. So the number one thing you can do in the classroom is truly, honestly, 100% believe. Don't not believe that every kid can get a 90. Believe that every kid can have a better relationship with math in your classroom than when they walked in the door. That's all you have to do. Truly believe it. And that in itself will be a game changer.
I love it. I love it. I was about to ask you for a big takeaway or an idea, and I feel like you just gave it to us. And I want to even add to that too. And something I'm trying to be more conscious of, and I hope other educators out there take that advice that you just shared, and also think about this as well. Like you had mentioned about, it's not about every student thinking or believing that they can get a 90, but to me, it's like trying to even reframe that and say, do you want to get a 90? Because if you really do, you can, like you totally can, but how much effort is that going to take you? It might take you a lot of effort. And if you're just going to put the same effort you're putting in right now, then that might just mean that you don't actually want a 90 that bad, right? So it's like a lot of times just framing that out, right?
Sorry, I'm like talking over you because I'm so excited. Because
Go for it.
But this is like the biggest actual point, I think, of this whole interview. And I didn't even say it. But Kyle, it is it. Because also you don't have to feel bad if you don't want a 90. Just
for sure.
But just be honest with it. Because if you say you want a 90 and you're putting in minimal effort, you're going to feel like a failure. But it's because you're not doing what you need to do to get a 90.
Yeah,
it's not
absolutely.
You can't get a 90. So I love that.
I love it. It actually, this drives it home. I think about this all the time. And I have a neighbor who runs marathons. Okay. I run in the morning 5K. My neighbor runs marathons. My neighbor tells me that she cannot get up at the same time I do to run in the morning. And we constantly talk about this. And I always say to her, I'm like, that's not true. I said, you just don't want to get up early, and that's okay. Right. Like, and that's that same discussion. Right. So, for me, I'm like, and I tell her and I say, listen, I know I can run a marathon. I do not want to run a marathon. I'm not willing to put in the effort to run a marathon. So it's like, even just reframing that a little bit, because it would be easy for me to say, well, I can only run 5K and you can run marathons, but I can get up early and you can't. And it's like, no. It's just that our vision, our goals are just different. And that's okay. I'm comfortable with that. And you should be comfortable that you don't want to get up early, but let's not kid ourselves and suggest it's like, impossible for us to do these things, because it totally is. It's just not where our head's at. And I think in a math classroom, again, coming back to what you said, I'm like, if we can help more students come to terms with that and be okay with that, right? Yeah. If it's like, listen, if that's okay, but do not tell me you can't do it, because I will not allow you to say that. And I think that's such a big takeaway, hopefully for those math moment makers out there who are listening. Listen, Vanessa, where can math moment makers learn more about you, your work, math therapy, your band? Tell us a little bit about that before we sign off for the day.
Okay. Well, most importantly, I'm on here to get Spotify followers for my band. So if nothing else, please look us up. We're called Goodnight Sunrise. Make sure when you look up Goodnight Sunrise, you see a picture of a woman that looks like me, because there's like this defunct band called Goodnight Sunrise from Montana. We're not that band. Goodnight Sunrise should be the first band that comes up. For the Math Guru, themathguru.ca, you can find everything. I'm mostly an Instagram person. So the Math Guru on Instagram, you can do the Math Guru on Twitter, and Math Therapy, the podcast. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can find Math Therapy.
Love it.
Awesome stuff. Vanessa, thanks so much for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule this summer. And we look forward to chatting with you again, and also to your session come this fall in the 2022 Make Math Moments Virtual Summit.
Yay.
All right.
Thanks so
We'll
much.
see
Take
you
care.
then. Take care. Have a great day.
Bye. I'm really awake now.
All right there, Math Moment Makers. So there you have it. That's Vanessa hanging out with us. And I'm sure you enjoyed the conversation. If you're listening to this nice and early in the morning, then you know how Vanessa felt this morning. She got up a little earlier than usual to chat with us. And we can't thank her enough for coming in and sharing some of those big takeaways. Remember, how are you going to hang on to some of this learning? I know for me, one of the big takeaways is, again, to always be thinking about goal setting for students and what is realistic for students and how much are they willing to put in order to get a goal. So helping students to set goals and make sure that they're real goals, right? We talked about that near the end of the episode. We don't want students walking away saying, I can't get a 90. It's like, no, you can get a 90. Are you willing to put in the effort to get a 90? So what is the goal that you're willing to put your effort into to achieve? Because everyone can do those things, but not if we just show up and we don't actually set reasonable goals and reasonable plans and action steps in order to reach those goals. So for me, what am I going to do? I'm reflecting right now by reiterating some of these key points. So maybe you want to do the same thing. Maybe you want to jot it down in a journal. Maybe you want to call a colleague, or maybe you want to leave a comment on our YouTube video that'll be up, or maybe on the blog over at makemathmoments.com. Whatever you choose to do, make sure you do something so that learning sticks.
Awesome, Kyle. Thanks for sharing that. Also, you can head on over to our Facebook page or our Facebook group, Math Moment Makers K-12, to share comments. Or don't forget that people are posting regular over there. So you could learn from them, or also post your pebble in your shoe right now over there and get some help in the private Facebook group. In order to ensure you don't miss out on new episodes as they come out each week, be sure to hit the subscribe button on your player right now. If this is your first time listening to the show, go ahead and do that. You will get notifications because we release them every Monday morning. If you are watching this right now over on YouTube, or hey, you're a YouTube watcher, get over there and subscribe, hit that bell so you also can enjoy the show on that different platform as well.
Awesome. Friends, we are looking for our next math mentoring moment episode. So make sure you let us know. All you need to do is give us a one-liner about the pebble that's kicking around in your shoe over at makemathmoments.com/mentor, makemathmoments.com/mentor. And we'll hop on, have a conversation with you about that pebble. Remember, show notes, links to resources, and complete transcripts to read and download right from the web to take with you can be found over on the website, makemathmoments.com/episode 194. Closing in on 200 here, John. That's
coming up.
makemathmoments.com/episode 194. Well, until next time, my Math Moment Maker friends, I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr.
High fives for us.
And a big high five for you.